this situation. Oh, just that. Do you know the business department? Dr.
I tried once, but I failed.
Every Friday.
It's not very user-friendly.
You don't go there. Very interesting. He organizes those talks. UCL people, maybe
You can do it as single slide.
anybody, especially for school.
If you want to do something that follows.
He said to me, don't travel on the underground in London and Russia. Don't go to any public place where there are a lot of people. That's his advice. That's his idea of security. He's from London. So don't travel on the underground in Russia. And that's his advice to me. Because it's really serious.
What is big Smyth? No, not me. Yeah. All right. Let me monitor my YouTube. All right, I think we can get started. Thank you very much for being here physically. For people who are attending remotely, YouTube, it's a first-time experiment, so hopefully will not be a disaster. But okay, so we'll start with a brief presentation of our course. I'm Emiliano De Cristofaro. I'm the course director for our MSc in Information Security. And then we have a stellar panel on information security, the road ahead, and I'm really grateful for our panelists that accepted our invitation to be here today. All right, so first of all, I hope you can read. I had to switch to white on black to make it more readable from the webcam point of view. So I want to give some links, and we'll obviously make the slides available online on our webpage. So we have several relevant resources online. So we have a social network presence on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, not Instagram yet. We have to start taking selfies while teaching. But okay, our official webpage is the link, and we are naturally hosted by, let's say, the Information Security Group, research group at UCL. So we have an official webpage and also a blog, Bentham's Gaze. And if you are not from UCL, and if you do join UCL, you will quickly, understand the name for our blog. But I'll leave it as a surprise. We're also recognized as an academic center of excellence in cybersecurity research by GCHQ and EPSRC, and we have a number of activities within this center. Okay, so I'd like to start the overview of our course by giving a brief introduction and a little bit of history about UCL and our department. So UCL will quite soon turn 200 years old. So we were established in 1826, and we're proud to say that we were the first institution in the UK to welcome students of any race, class, or religion, and to accept female students on equal terms with men. So today we are a global leading university with very strong research focus. I hope these numbers are still accurate. Actually, I hope they're not. Let me rephrase. So we have 29 Nobel Prize winners, 3 field medalists, and our trademark, let's say, is London's Global University. Computer science, the Department of Computer Science is one of the largest in the world, I think. We have more than 80 faculty, more than 300 researchers, and with respect to security, we're proud to host the Science of Cybersecurity Institute, And as I mentioned, we are recognized as an academic center of excellence. In terms of our research outputs, we were recently, a couple of years ago, ranked first in the UK for quality of research. This exercise, peer-based review called Research Excellence Framework, and we were ranked first. And also, if you believe in the various rankings by various newspapers and magazines and websites, you will find UCL Computer Science constantly ranked in the top. So why would you want to study information security at UCL? Well, from my personal point of view, I'll say, the four main reasons may include the fact that we have a world-class faculty with leading researchers and teachers in computer security. We do cutting-edge research, and our papers are constantly published in top venues. And we hope we can offer a hands-on experience on information security, which is enriched by a number of industry collaborations. So hopefully, we offer a balanced mix of theory and practice. So our graduates are keenly sought by leading security organizations, also due to our international reputation and strong links with industry, and as I said, our world-class research. So top graduate destinations include corporate partners like IBM, Ernst & Young, Cisco, KPMG, but a lot of our graduates also pursue further studies, and as well as PhD. They go for startups and so on. Top graduate roles include security consultant, secure software designer, research and development in security, information protection advisor, analyst, and so on. So in terms of the topics that we cover at UCL in our MSc program, so we have a pretty broad variety of things that we teach, ranging from network, software, and system security to cryptography, cryptanalysis, as well as cybercrime, human-centered security, privacy technologies, and in general, we have a strong focus on security engineering. So our faculty, very briefly, we have a number of excellent instructors and researchers in alphabetical order. Kurt Barr, who teaches malware, David Clark, who teaches malware and language-based security, Nicolas Courtois, who teaches cryptanalysis and applied cryptography, George Dananesis, who's hiding in the back, who teaches computer security 1 and privacy, myself, who I teach computer security 2 and introduction to cryptography, Brad Carr teaches distributed systems and security, Jens Krinke, malware and language-based security, Stephen Murdoch, also here is going to be one of our panelists, who teaches research in information security, David Payne, pending confirmation, will start teaching next year a new module, philosophy, politics, and economics of security and privacy. Angela Sasse, who's also here and is also one of our panelists, was a fellow at the Royal Academy of Engineering and teaches people and security. Gianluca Security. That's a good nickname. Gianluca Security. Gianluca Stringhini, who's also one of our panelists, who teaches computer security 2 and cybercrime. A relatively new module was introduced this year. So I think it just finished its first occurrence. We also have a number of faculty that are not currently teaching in the MSc, but engage with our students and do research in topics related to information security, like Jens Groth, who's a cryptographer, as well as Sarah Michaeljohn, who does research in cryptography, cryptocurrencies, and security in general. Okay, so I already mentioned some of our modules when I introduced you to our faculty. So our program is structured as follows. We have 8 modules. 4 are compulsory, and are Introduction to Cryptography, Computer Security 1 and 2, and research in information security. And we have 4 optional modules, which the students can choose from the official MSc ISAC information security optional modules, or from other programs under the approval of the course director and their personal tutor. I'll get back to this in a second. So the optional modules include things like applied cryptography, cryptanalysis, privacy technologies, malware language-based security, cybercrime, distributed systems and security, people and security, information security management, and philosophy, politics, and economics of security and privacy. So I use these kind of color codes. It's utterly inaccurate, but just to group, so to speak, some of our modules. So to show that kind of broad range of topics that we cover, so ranging from more, let's say, crypto-oriented to more system security-oriented or software security-oriented, or dealing more with the human aspects of security and privacy. But the choice of the modules can be independent of, let's say, these colors or these groups. There is also a mandatory thesis, which is intended to be an independent piece of research. And ultimately, the students will produce a report, typically between 50 and 100 pages, which can be completed while working alongside a company. So we also have a number of extracurricular activities. Every Thursday at 4 p.m., we have a weekly information security seminar, sometime with invited speakers, so world-leading researchers from other universities or companies. They present their work in security-related work, but sometimes we also have, let's say, internal seminars. So UCL academics or researchers or PhD students, they present their latest piece of work, and maybe they're going to a conference. They give a talk before to us at UCL before presenting the work at the conference. Gianluca has also been kind enough to run a weekly hacking seminar, ethical hacking, of course, and has taken a few students to various capture the flag competitions with excellent results. We also run a Bitcoin research seminar in the past, Nicolas Courtois, and we also hold industry day with some of our industrial contacts. So in terms of the program, we have, let's say, 3 options. Students can take full-time program, so they complete the 8 modules, 4 compulsory, 4 optional, as well as the thesis in 1 year. I have a little bit of a schedule in a couple of slides. Or they can do it part-time, so they can split the 8 modules over 2 years, not necessarily 4 and 4. They can do 5 and 3 or 4 and 6 and 2 and so on. And the thesis needs to be completed, so the report needs to be filed in the last year. But just also want to clarify, this is a common question that we get. The students must be available to follow modules during regular teaching hours. So part-time students attend the same lectures as the full-time students. So we do not accommodate, let's say, evening or weekend classes. There's also an option of enrolling in a diploma, so the students can complete the 8 modules, but not the thesis. Okay, in terms of applications, so usually we ask our applicants to have a bachelor's or a master's degree in computer science, mathematics, or some other quantitative discipline. And in the application material, we are looking for the ability to understand theory and definitely an interest in information security. So, I mean, as a joke, I say if I receive an application, the first thing I do is Control F and look for keyword security. But definitely we're looking for some experience with programming and understanding of algorithms, as well as, of course, good English language skills. So, I mean, we look at a variety of applications. So some students may be more grounded in theory, some more in, let's say, programming or algorithms, but, you know, students don't have to be excellent in all of these aspects, okay? So here is a slide I promised about our schedule, let's say. So we have 2 teaching terms. Term 1 runs from early October to mid-December, so right before the Christmas break. Term 2 runs from early January, second week of January or so, to end of March. And then we have a term for exams. So all exams are taken by the students in May or very beginning of June. So at the end of so the exams are not at the end of each term, but they're all together in May, beginning of June. So April is dedicated to reviewing material and preparing for the exam, and then May is exam time. The thesis has to be filed, so the report has to be submitted usually by end of August, very early September. So the bulk of the work will be done typically after the exams, so between June and August. But we do expect students to start working on their thesis and preparing for their research projects between January and May. And so the graduation happens in November, and then the ceremony actually happens in August of the following year. So it will be August 2018 for students starting in October 2016. Okay, so every student gets a personal tutor who's a member of the academic staff, and typically the tutor is there to help with academic advice and questions and feedback. So for instance, a typical set of questions that we usually get are: should I take this module or this other module? Can you help me decide what set of optional modules I should take? But also, it is a resource if things go sour and there's some problems, let's say, between the student and the thesis supervisor, and of course there is some confidentiality within this process. And of course, if there are problems also with a personal tutor, then the course director, myself, or department resources like graduate tutor or the head of department are there to help as well. There's also a student representative for each of our cohorts. It's called STAR, who speaks on behalf of the cohort, and for any potential issues that might arise that might affect the entire group. I mean, this shouldn't happen, but in the off chance that there is some scheduling conflict, definitely the student representative will take action. But in general, we look forward to receiving suggestions for improvement and feedback, and the student representative is good, can take this forward. So the relevant contacts for a program are myself, I'm a program director, Dr. George Danesis, who's the admissions tutor, and our great Sean, our program administrator, Sean Taylor. And again, I just want to display the slides with relevant information and our social network, social media presence. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll take just a couple of quick questions, and then we can move on to our panel. Any questions? No questions? Don't be shy. Okay, well, great. Thank you. So maybe we can move to our panel. Right. Thank you.
I think we may need to move this.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we'd like to have a little bit of a discussion, a bit of a panel about the road ahead for information security. And I'm really glad to introduce our panelists. We have David Emms, who's a senior researcher at Kaspersky Lab. He's been at Kaspersky since 2004, and he has a particular interest in the malware ecosystem, identity theft, and he is one of the people behind the malware defense workshop. He's conceived it and developed. Thank you, David. Then next we have Dr. Smyth, who's the head of threat, risk, and compliance at Vodafone. He's an experienced senior manager with 15 years of risk, security, and controls experience. He's been at JP Morgan Chase, and now in Vodafone is responsible for their security, risk, and compliance team. And already somewhat introduced Professor Angela Sasse, who's a professor of human-centered security at UCL, fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. I wanted to have one sentence summarizing somewhat your research, so I decided to look at your most famous paper, which is titled "Users Are Not the Enemy," and I think that says it all. Next, Dr. Stephen Murdoch, as a principal research fellow at UCL, security architect at Vasco, and his most famous paper maybe is "Chip and Pin is Broken," right? I can say it. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Gianluca Stringhini, who is a lecturer at UCL with joint appointment in both computer science and crime science at UCL. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I would say that your most famous paper is detecting spammer on social networks. Do you agree? Maybe. All right. So thank you very much again. Maybe I can actually turn that off. Is there a way to? Yes. Okay. All right. So I'd like to start with a few questions for our panelists. If people in the audience want to ask any clarifications or share their opinion, please feel free. But I will definitely leave some time at the end for ask me anything format, so you can ask any questions you like to our panelists. Okay, so our first question really deals with security education for, let's say, for the masses, for non-tech savvy users, let's say. So actually, this question came to me as I started following David a couple of days ago on Twitter, and I saw a retweet of a Cyber Streetwise campaign dealing with software updates. So I don't know if everybody is familiar with Cyber Streetwise, but so I think I opened, yes. So you have these adverts on the tube and in other areas where they give easy to understand allegedly advice about security, like use strong passwords, install security software, download software updates. Right? So my question is Cyber Streetwise the best we can do in practice in terms of security education and outreach? And what other sources of information are available, let's say, to regular people to help them make productive security decisions? I'm stealing one of Angela's research terms. And I've seen, besides that, a lot of people tend to get their security education from, let's say, TV channels, newspapers, and magazines. But sometimes I have the feeling that some of the press is mostly driven by PR from major corporations or universities. So what can we do? Who wants to go first?
On Cyber Streetwise specifically, I've always been quite disappointed that it's pretty much restricted to online, and it's pretty London-centric. And at times people push back at me and say, well, most people under the age of 20 are not glued to the TV anymore. But if you look at the ratings for some of the most popular programs, they're huge. There are masses and masses of people. And I'm from a generation where we were drip-fed information about how to stay safe on the roads, what the dangers of not wearing a seatbelt are, why drink driving is bad, why you shouldn't wander away from your parents when you're small. And I don't think that we're doing the same thing to the children of today. We're not drip feeding them. There's no equivalent of an online common sense, which so we teach our children about safety in the real world, and it's easy as a parent to kind of pass that on, but we haven't got the same kind of sense of safety online. So I actually don't think we do anywhere near enough as a society to lift the level of awareness. And it's not about recognizing this or that phishing email. It's about a security mindset.
Yeah. So I've dealt with security education with two of my roles. So one is working with the Tor project, where we were developing software to protect people's privacy online. And then the other one is developing security software for banks. And in both of those cases, education was really seen as a last resort. It was expensive, it's unreliable, and it wastes the time of the users of the system. So all our effort went to trying to make sure that the system was safe to use without specialist education into how to use the device or how to use the software. And only if all else fails, that then you start putting effort into trying to educate the people who are using it, but realize that in most cases that's not going to work. Many people will not see the information. Many people who see it won't understand it, even if it is written exemplarily. And when it actually comes to carrying out the task, most users will probably not follow the advice because their focus is on doing what they want to do, not on following all the steps that we've set out. So it really, the device should be, our software should be safe. If the user needs to know something, it should be there in front of them. And even that is not ideal because they might miss it. And only if everything has gone horribly wrong, then maybe you should try to give specialist education to the customers.
Well, this is what human factor, basically that's what human factors design basically is. Fundamental principle is that 90% is you fit the system to human capabilities and limitations, and only in about 10% of cases do you basically try and change the human to fit the particular system that you're doing. And what actually really upsets me about this is it's about very well designed stuff, and I can tell you that one of the finest and most expensive advertising agencies in the country has basically worked on the visuals and on the communication aspect, but it's a garbage in, garbage out problem, right? I mean, the actual advice they're giving is rubbish in most cases. So just look at the first advice they give: use a strong password, right? And if given the threat model today, that's just rubbish, right? The most important advice you give to somebody is don't reuse a password that you use on an important account like your work account or your online banking account on any other websites, right? That is the single most important piece of advice you want to give to people, right? Or you want to say to people like, maybe look a bit more carefully when you put a password somewhere, how the service provider is protecting those passwords. Are they actually doing a proper job? The world, if they're not protecting the password file properly, right, it's gone. When it's, so this is, it's just one example of, I'm sorry, who makes up this stuff? And when I ask them, so I go to them, right, and because we've worked in the projects I do, one of the projects I have, which is co-sponsored by GCHQ. They published password advice last autumn, which is basically revising a lot of the previous policies. And they've taken heed and basically said, we've got to make this simpler for people to do the right thing. There's more responsibility for system owners and service providers to actually have a coherent approach to protecting accounts, rather than just basically telling people more and more stuff they ought to be doing. And actually, the responsible service providers are doing a pretty good job at this. But so the government's still dishing out, advice that goes against what their main, what their national technical authority sets as advice for government departments. And when I ask them about this, we get some industry experts together in a room and then we do what they cannot. And I go like, what kind of approach is that, right? And actually, one of these experts, for instance, he was in a Guardian article at the end of last year, he was saying, people should have a different password for each account and it should be at least 15 characters long and you should have random user IDs for all of your accounts as well. And you go like, where are we? Does this man have any idea how much time and effort it would take to do this? And most people, if you give advice like that, most people just switch off because they think security is a joke. And so I think that's basically, so we need to clean up the quality of the content we're putting there before we're worrying about whether this is a good way of getting it out to people.
I think some of this bleeds over into the business world too, because I don't think businesses are terribly good at communicating with their staff. I mean, one of the things which, if in the course of my work, I get asked by our PR agency to review documents which are going to go out. One of the first things I look for in any kind of document like this is the word user, and I ask them to change it, because if you're setting the tone of the dialogue if you're calling people users. I only know one other place where that term gets used, and it's drug
only
use.
2 industries.
Yeah, and their staff and their colleagues or their public or their individuals. So I don't think that's very good. But I mean, in terms of one of the big problem areas, I think, for business, and it also in the wider world too, is legitimate practice is very, very close to criminal practice. And if we're going to behave in the same way, I mean in terms of delivery mechanism, not in terms of intent. But for example, if we're going to tell people, don't click on attachments or click on links in random emails or ones that you don't trust, but at the same time, some head of department in a company sends around a circular with a PDF attachment, and we expect people to click on it. It's like, well, how do we expect to condition people's behavior?
That's a really good example.
How do you, as an individual, know whether one's good and what? Okay, it comes from Eugene Kaspersky, my CEO. Well, okay, maybe or maybe not. And I understand why people are pressured into doing it, but I think the same is true with other organisations and the way people communicate with consumers as well. So I don't think we can expect good results when we're not making it clear enough what the behaviour is between legitimate and non-legitimate.
Yeah, I think the world is messy, isn't it? So what we can do is give people tools to better distinguish between those things. And it's quite interesting to David's comment that I think we, even if we try and do a well-crafted campaign, so for example, we fish people on purpose and see what happens, and if they click on the link and say, here's what you might have looked at in this, and sort of more experiential type things rather than just a policy, it still is quite interesting how little of it, how unsuccessful it is, and how little the decrease in the click-through rate is. So and if it's difficult with a controlled population, we know they're sitting in their seats and doing something, that's even more difficult with the general public. And the only thought that I had is something around digital citizenship. I know it's a bit of a buzz phrase, but generally speaking, back to your point about schools and how do we actually educate the population about things. And I was just thinking, we don't see government information campaigns anymore, do we? There is no Green Cross code for the cyber world.
No.
And maybe it's just because there's a much more of an individualistic culture today than there was.
No, I think part of the problem is because it would have to, that Green Cross code would have to be, I don't know, minimum 152 pages long, right? And it would have 400 and something different rules, most of which, half of which contradict each other.
Yeah, just run past it.
You have to get it right. It's a risk-based thing, isn't it? One of the main threats that the rural people face, so phishing is a clear one,
But isn't that a good example of something where we could do so much better, right? I mean, so when I, for instance, I'm utterly against, companies phishing their own employees, because if you basically step a little bit aside and look at, what relationship does a company want to have with its employees, right? You want to actually be able to trust each other. And if you're now like thinking, oh, I'm not only being attacked by possibly by some people out there, even, by my own, and then they make it like, it's my fault. I always say to a company is exactly what you said. If embedded links and attachments are important to your business, it's very simple to say to people, don't click on this stuff if that's not what you encounter in your day-to-day business practice. If you don't have to do that, then we can give out a simple guidance behavior rule. But if you need those things, then you need to really design a support, infrastructure that helps people, and telling, asking them to look for a detailed kind of, it's not going to work. And so I think the kind of things we want to look to in what we're doing in the courses, there's real, where you go like, it's a crying shame. Why don't we have PKI-based systems implemented that would, if people could actually tell whether the information really is from Eugene Kaspersky, if that email really is from Eugene Kaspersky or not, it would make their decision to click on a link or not, that would really simplify it. But instead, because we haven't really got properly digitally signed email and encrypted email widely rolled out, that's why it's so difficult. And I think basically we see that good organizations really then try to take most of that load onto it themselves and filter emails, filter stuff out, and that there is a point of contact where somebody picks up the phone when a staff member is not sure whether a particular where they can report emails.
Yeah, I think those things are. But there's some. If you think of examples, we had our CFOs received emails purportedly from our chief executive with a quite obviously spoofed email address, which if they'd looked at the header, they would have seen that it wasn't. They clicked on the link or they responded to him saying, yes, here's the information you requested, Mr. Chief Executive. So, we've tried to do some work with the senior management, to your point, that they have to set the tone. And we do try to, screen for malware and, everybody else, but you can't get everything. So it's just hopefully we can push the balance a little bit more in our favor and just reduce the number of people phoning up help desk saying my laptop just got encrypted by ransomware. So we see a lot of today.
Sorry, can I just make a comment on that? In real life, you have lots of accounts, so you're forced to have lots of passwords. And then you either have one password for all of them, or you write it down, or something. I don't know. Different people have different ways to cope with that situation. Because it's easy to say to change your password, make it longer, but in real, I've got my bank, Facebook, Twitter, all of these. You have to remember that, and if it's all impossible. And the other thing is the rate of technology is changing so fast that governments can't legislate or come up with a green book. It's very difficult. I mean, if they don't work with the industry, even the industry, it's very difficult to come up with laws to protect people or make the industry compliant with this new technology. I mean, this is my view. I don't know what you guys think.
The advice given with passwords is often contradictory at worst and impossible to follow at least. So I think if the advice we saw from Cyber Streetwise
Right.
Then talk about the most important thing, which is use different passwords for each website, and then find some way to manage that. So having some software to store your passwords is a pretty good option. Writing them down, often said as to be forbidden, actually a pretty good option in many cases, because for the majority of threats, it's people on the other side of the internet trying to attack you, not people in your own home. There are some exceptions to that. So
banking.
yeah. So in the case of bank pins, then the person who you're worrying about is someone who steals your wallet. And the other one is your email, because if someone gets access to your email account, they can probably reset the passwords for everything else. So your email account has probably got to be well protected. But a better solution is try to move to better software solutions to avoid people having to jump through ridiculous hoops. So one-time passwords help. And we've talked a bit about the Green Cross Code.
Yeah.
That was just one of many things that the government did to make people safer on the roads. So they changed the type of junctions. They introduced speed limits, they had punishments for drivers who broke the rules. They redesigned cars so that if they hit you, you're much more likely to be safe. They improved visibility in the cars and the junctions to try to help people not run into children on the road. They put people on the roads to try to protect the children. So there's lots and lots of things that we're doing to try to protect people on the road. It wasn't just the Green Cross Code. That was just a relatively small part of it, and it should be a relatively small part of improving computer security too.
I think the other thing as well, and this goes for the Green Cross Code, the drink drives, the seat belts, was nobody designing those campaigns expected them to work overnight. So you change the law and say you must wear a seatbelt. Did everybody do it straight away? No. Did you put out public information? Did everybody change their mind? No. But right now, 30 something years later, most people most of the time do. And yet I think, again, going back to business and business communities, we sort of expect education to be a little bit like a dose of penicillin, rather than housekeeping. Clean the carpets, you've got to do it every week. Sorry, but the dust is going to come back. You still do it. You don't give up and say it's a waste of time. Along with the fact, the other things as well. So it's I think we don't necessarily reconcile ourselves to the fact that actually it's an ongoing process.
And the fact that people invest in antivirus software, so you don't normally expect to get a virus if you do click on an attachment. That's an assumption about most people. Yeah.
That is an assumption most people make. I mean, in our course, I often joke about they're basically, if you ask people what they're and it's human nature, that once you have a certain protection method in place, then people over attribute the protection to make them, basically what people tell us is what it actually looks after is fantastic. I mean, any day now, somebody will basically mention it cures toenail fungus, I think. And they're basically all
the next release.
the next release will do that. And yeah, so that's basically but that is because people are looking for a quick way of dealing with the security problem, and so in their mind it's convenient to assume that if you do something, that this will now protect you from all evil. But that's clearly where the understanding is just over.
Back to your point as well about road safety. I like airbags and side impact bars, and I love all of that stuff, and I love the fact that civil engineers will design the roads properly. But at the end of the day, I also get into the car knowing that I've got a responsibility to drive properly.
Yeah, I think also one of the main differences between street security and computer security is that most of the rules in street security come from common sense and so on. Sometimes in computer security, whoever makes the rules is a very technical person who just tries to come up with a complicated policy, right, or something like that. Sometimes all these problems are so new that it's not even easy to agree on what the best solution is. So maybe 10 years from now we will have common sense rules for this kind of threats too.
Okay, thank you. I don't know where it's coming from. Okay, please. I don't know where it's coming.
Well, I want to ask a little bit different type of the discussion, because this is about the security for information, but on the society, the big news recently about the iPhones. The IBM is trying to protect the customer's data. API's request to get into the phone.
Yeah.
And also recently we have a lot of the terrorist attack, and how can the security person or security force can detect such the terrorist attack in advance of the accident happening. So against that one, how the security information is related or against along. So that kind of the most updated process is what I want to ask.
It's a real problem because I think we all want governments to be able to protect us from terrorists. We all, well, a lot of us want to secure our data, protect our privacy. Where I kind of slap my head a little bit in consternation is when you hear, and President Obama's kind of verged on this as well, it's kind of like, well, can't all you boffins sort this out? And it's a bit like, well, look, you want me to leave the key under the mat so that my family know where the key is, but you don't want somebody else to find it. And it's like, you can't do it. And then however clever we are, that's the underlying concept behind that is flawed. And I don't think politicians understand. I don't think they understand, which is why they equally slap their heads with their hands and say, can't you boffins just sort this out? So I don't think they really understand what the issue is. I mean, as to this specific case, I rather think that this was less about the FBI needing to get into the device than that they had picked a particular instance where they wanted to create a legal precedent. But you know, I think there is a very real issue. There is always going to be a tension between privacy on the one hand, confidentiality on the one hand, and you know, the need to actually see what people are doing if they pose a threat. And that's not new. I think you know the same issue. If you go back to the Second World War, you know, you had cryptographers trying to secrete information, and you had people equally trying to break into that. The difference is, it was a handful of people who used that technology, whereas now it could be everybody, everywhere.
One saying is that what the FBI are asking for is that they want security to be so bad that even the least sophisticated police force should have access to all the information they need, but security should be so good that the most sophisticated nation state should not have access to this information. So it's impossible to have one solution that will make everyone happy. But the FBI get blamed when they're not able to investigate a crime because they're unable to deal with the technology. However, if as a result of facilitating surveillance, security causes, or it creates a security failure, which causes another crime to happen, that's not the FBI's problem anymore. So they're focusing on what is getting them bad press. And that's why also FBI are running into conflict with other areas of the government. So the CIA and the NSA are essentially saying the FBI are wrong in asking for this. And it's quite, you'd think it's unusual that these are surveillance agencies saying that actually surveillance should be harder than the FBI wants, but these organizations are also trying to secure the nation. And they're saying that security is so terrible, we should not be trying to make it worse. And just on the same day that the FBI dropped the court case, a researcher, Matt Green, found quite a serious vulnerability in iMessage and Apple iMessage. And because Apple iMessage was so complex, there was a flaw that nobody noticed for 5 years, and the FBI are asking for it to be made even more complex in order to facilitate law enforcement. So it's not really a privacy security trade-off, it's a security surveillance trade-off.
So in that situation then, really it's to do with the fact that you have the FBI trying to exceed its mandates and its actual powers. It's more of them looking to have more easy access and power than they should have.
Yeah, I think they probably did exceed what they were allowed to do. They used some like 16th century legislation in order to get the court order to compel FBI to install this backdoor. And the reason that they used this ancient legislation is that more modern legislation had been discussed and then had been decided to be dropped by the government because it was inappropriate. So the politicians have decided, that what the FBI are asking for is a bad idea, but they found a way to transfer it anyway.
Yeah, I'll take maybe one more quick question about this, and then we can move on. Please.
So this is back to the education transport part, or maybe I think I wanted to pick up on the mention of like better encryption of email and sort of identification in that sense. So, but this is more of, do you think it's more important for like to create that dialogue between like the government, tech companies and security specialists to actually get this right, or is it more important to engage tech companies to get their developers to think about security from the start, as opposed to being like, oh, okay, we're going to build this amazing product, launch a startup, okay, and then we'll get funding, and then once we have a core team of developers, then we'll think about the platform and for security. Or do you think like maybe engaging the actual like active developer community directly? So like people who work on open source projects, or like students like me, just kind of learning to code and having to learn about security on my own time. It's like
well, it's. I mean, things are happening already in terms of education. So the BCS and the IET together with the government have already. They're moving now towards, if you want your computer science degree to be certified, to get the exemption on the way to the professional status, is there's now going to be a minimum amount of security training and education that has to be in your degree. I think it's actually, to some extent, it's pretty stunning that it's taken this long for that to be mandatory, and I think really it's been discussed both with industry. I remember like Intel, for instance, they thought it was, there's always a summit they hold every year together with some leading academics, and the Intel guy said, it's just appalling when you look at some database courses and some programming courses, that when they give examples, and they clearly basically give examples that from a security point of view, you go like, no, don't do this. So definitely more general education of software developers and more support for software developers, because these guys don't make the mistakes deliberately or because they're totally careless, because again, they're under pressure to perform, to get stuff out. And we've got to basically make it easier for do. And there's some interesting research. I mean, we discussed, for instance, in our course, our colleague Matt Smyth from Germany did a really interesting study about why so many developers, app developers, make mistakes in implementing SSH. And basically with certificate pinning found one way of making it easier for them to get this right. So we need definitely a lot more work in that in this area. But also when you come up with a grand scheme like PKI, there's a lot of lessons to be learned about how you can make a great idea in a technology that would in principle have a lot of benefits really hard and far too expensive to implement, that you actually need to think about the governance structures, the cost involved, and who should have which roles and responsibilities and who should pay for which kind of costs. At the moment, quite often things go wrong in security, and I think Stephen from can tell for a lot of examples from banking. where the people who are most clued up then try to push most of the risk and most of the expense onto the less clueless stakeholders as a way of safeguarding their own position. And in the long run, that never works. You know, the people who are actually well-intentioned and want to work together have to collaborate. You know, we should be fighting the attackers out there and not trying to trick and cheat each other within the commercial systems that we're trying to run.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier about education being a last resort and really hard to do. The right way to do it, if you have to do it, is have people who are actually working with the customers and who are actually using the technology, work with the people who know how to do education properly. But more often than not, the people who design the education materials are the lawyers, and they're not trying to educate people, they're trying to cover up all their own weaknesses. And then you're pretty much guaranteed that the advice that's given is going to be hard to follow and probably wrong.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to a slightly different topic, but around security in businesses and enterprises. So, I mean, from my biased point of view, probably, I see that most small and medium businesses don't have or decide not to dedicate resources to have, you know, relatively large security department or, you know, run in-house advanced security defense tools. And so what I have observed is that most of them seem to rely on, you know, security vendors and, you know, their kind of business pitches. I've been to some of the conventions like the RSA conference. It's really mostly a business pitch, right? And so some security vendors have been accused of selling snake oil products. I mean, there's famous essay by security guru or security rock star, let's say Bruce Schneier, who wrote about the security market for lemons, right? Somewhat repurposing the expression market for lemons from a famous 1970 paper by Nobel Prize winner George Archerloff. So how can CTOs and companies in general know what tools they should invest on? You know, how is this done in practice? You know, and what kind of approaches they should follow, right? Is that utilitarian approach based on risk, benefit, cost, compliance, or what can we do? Okay, actually, I'd like to ask Mal.
Yeah, I thought you might do that. So yes. I represent the entire private sector in the world. So, I think it's an incredibly difficult question to answer because are we talking about one-man band or are we talking about a major enterprise? I mean, at the top end, obviously, we have our own, you know, our own departments that focus on this. When you get down to more of the small and medium enterprises, that are people who often are suppliers. Then they're obviously challenged to implement, you know, whatever our security protocol or ISO 27001 we might ask for. One thing we started to do here was see if we could use Cyber Essentials to help some of our smaller supplier companies. I'm sure Angela will give a few on Cyber Essentials in a minute. But you know, in terms of something that's accredited by the government, it provides you some pointers and areas to focus on, which is not the full picture, and something that maybe smaller enterprises can use. So we started dipping our toe in the water, sort of helping out our suppliers by, you know, enabling them a little bit for this sort of thing and trying to improve the health of the population a bit. And I'm sure it's not perfect, right? So, but if you want actionable guidance, it's quite concrete. It's quite, you know, it's a program you can implement in a relatively small organization. But at the bottom end, when you've got like, you know, one-person shows, then you're really down to your service provider, you know, common tools you buy like antivirus, and actually people in your organization knowing what they should be doing. And probably the people side is the most effective when you get down to the tiniest companies, because they're not going to be targeted by, you know, major, except just by chance. You know, we see a lot of drive-by type activity, and just because we're big, we have a lot of it. So we have a lot of people trying to do ransomware, not targeted at us. It's just random. But obviously everybody will see the same thing, and you know, some people foolishly pay up, and that's how the criminals have a good business model. But yeah, it's really difficult to give a general. You know, things like Cyber Essentials and other things may help.
That's a really good question, though. Why isn't the company, the government, running a campaign, to basically saying, if this happens to you, don't pay? I mean, that is a really simple message you could get out there, but who's, the amount of people who've actually even heard about ransomware and would know what to do.
Or the FBI saying the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a guy from the FBI last year said, we routinely tell people to pay the ransom. Now, I accept the point that in a given situation, if somebody knocks on the FBI's door and says, we're in this hopeless situation, we've got no backup, then you might say, you know what, that is all you've got to do, but I would steer clear from announcing it publicly because you just validate the business model.
Yeah, well, and also there's nothing stopping them coming back for more.
Exactly.
So
if you think this is the end of it.
Obviously, they may have a good customer service ethos, in which case they will actually give you the encryption key, but you don't know that.
I think they generally do, but I think they do that because they know the next time round.
Yeah, they'll be able to
If
do
they
it.
haven't done it before, then it won't work next time. But it's not from philanthropy.
Yeah.
Anyone wants to add?
SMEs, I actually agree with you that I think the cyber essentials, it's a start,
Okay.
right? It's actually, I think, I don't agree with in detail with what they say. And we do, basically, this is some of the research we actually do, is that we go and look at SMEs and see why they can't comply or why they don't feel it's worthwhile complying with some of them. But it's, and there are some concrete, we can actually see that for some industry sectors, for some SME specific profiles, actually there would be better advice. But it's a start for it. It's a start.
We weren't looking for like a certificate. It was just like, here's some advice that you get, it's written down. You don't need to get the certificate if you don't want to. But there are some people offering training and things who can help you. The certificate isn't the end goal, it's the activity that you do to get it.
So another problem with these tools that, if companies, let's say, purchase too much security, so too many systems and so on, then they get overwhelmed with alerts, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're constantly under attack, most of the attacks don't really matter, and so on. So there is the example of Target, this retail store, a couple of years ago. So they got breached, and it was all over the news and so on. But it turns out that their systems actually raised an alert, just that nobody paid attention because there were so many meaningless alerts that they couldn't, figure out which one was the one that they should have paid attention to.
So I think that's another example of bad design. So if you're using security software, it's very much in your face. There's a little bouncing ball to tell you that it's running, and then every so often it'll tell you you're under attack and you've been protected from this thing, even though it probably wouldn't have done any harm at all. We can use a web browser, every tiny little thing will have a warning, even when it's probably innocuous, and the computer can probably work out it's innocuous. But if you look at other industries, that would be considered insane. So jumbo jets, extraordinarily complicated bits of equipment. The average flight goes through without one warning. Not even a warning, the lowest level of categorization. They've just put so much effort to ensure that only things that are serious enough should actually be escalated to the pilot, and only things that have a risk of causing the plane to crash should be raised as a serious alert. And there's been no pressure in computing to try to limit the warnings to only what is absolutely essential for the customer to see.
So how about bounty programs? Gianluca, I think you were in BBC just yesterday talking about this.
Yes.
Do you think it's a good thing? Do they work?
Yeah, I think I think very good idea personally. So it's there will be a lot of people looking for vulnerabilities out there. So it's good for companies to attract the good hackers, so to speak, and look at their code and so on. It's also a good way to reward them. And there is a lot of money in vulnerabilities from good actors, but also from bad actors. So it's I think it's good if companies actually.
I think we are trying to write something that's legally sound, that we can do that and tell security researchers, as we call them, or good hackers, that they can tell us about. They can tell us about stuff, and we will, guarantee to protect them, not sort of say, you've come up with an error, we'll sue you. So that's the key concern. In fact, we had a case in Germany where a security researcher didn't do that. They talked to the press about vulnerability in our cable modems that we sell to customers in Germany, which allowed one person to hack in to other people's information. So it was quite an important vulnerability. But he didn't go to us because he was concerned if he complained, we would say, we'd try and silence him. Or so the lesson is we need to be really clear about how we actually want to hear about these things. But obviously that message hasn't got through yet, unfortunately.
I do have the counter argument to some of this when it comes to crypto, for instance, right? So there's some of the end-to-end encrypted chat applications like Telegram decided to brew their own crypto, and there's a completely closed design, and for some reason they decide not to use state-of-the-art cryptographic tools, and then they say, oh, but we have a bounty program, $100,000 if someone breaks our scheme, and so it's secure, you can trust it, right? I have a problem with that. Personally, I might be biased, but because if I do discover a bug or a security vulnerability in the protocol, I will contact them and they say, okay, instead of giving you 100,000, we give you $1 million if you don't report it, right? Or in general, I have a problem with.
I think we're
with having
talking money, then that is problematic.
No, but with crypto, I think it's maybe different. So I mean, but my let's say provoking argument is that they shouldn't replace formal proofs, or they shouldn't justify choices of deviating from well understood and reasonably secure cryptographic tools.
I don't think people should design things properly, but the reality is many of our products are very complicated. They come together from various parts. There will be vulnerabilities found. It's better if that happens than the vulnerability comes to us and they give us a reasonable time to fix it. Or that's reality. Every phone, every piece of software, every cable, there'll be something we haven't discovered yet, because software is very complex.
But there you're talking about implementation, basically implementation errors, as opposed to what Emiliano is talking about, where you're basically not actually following proper proper design approach. In the first place.
It's already happening in the US. The Department of Defense has a black hat, kind of like first of all, where they find all the hackers, and they hack into things and give them contracts or employ them.
Well, and the other issue, and it kind of ties those two things together, is so you say we'll give you $1 million if you don't disclose this, but some guys over here will offer me $1.5 million if I tell them it and they want to launch an attack on it. And so the danger is you get this kind of muddy water between the whites, you get grey hats.
Yeah. Okay, so I was planning to be done at 7 so that we can have an hour for some nibbles and drinks. So maybe in the last 15 minutes we can have some questions from the audience on anything you might like.
I guess quick question. Threat intelligence. Do you think it works?
What?
Threat intelligence.
Threat.
Essentially, engaging with the hacker community and trying to find out what any hacker is talking. Or for example, with a company, say company McDonald's, going into the community to try and find out who is potentially trying to launch an attack on McDonald's. So engaging with the hackers and on the dark web and forums, engaging with them, trying to basically pretending you're one of them to try and gain information in order to report back to McDonald's, for example.
It's tricky. I think if we're talking about gathering information on what people are doing, that's one thing. I think it depends on probably on the level of engagement, because there's got to be a line at which you start to cross that ethical boundary. So I think, as I say, if what you're talking about is I mean, I'll give you an example. So at the Kaspersky lab, everyone can opt in. It's an opt-in. If you install our software, you can opt into what's called the Kaspersky Security Network. So metadata on the file you're accessing gets put up to our cloud. We look at its reputation, or we run bot farms, where we're looking at particular type of attacks or particular groups involved in attacks, and we're looking at information on what they're doing, where the traffic's coming from, and so on. And maybe we get to a point where we can share that with law enforcement agencies. And then the question comes, well, okay, maybe clean up all those infected computers. That's against the law in a lot of countries, because we're making an unauthorized modification to a computer, which under Section 2 of the Computer Misuse Act is a crime. And it's like, it's for a good purpose, and it's like, you know what, but ethically, there's an issue there. And it's going to depend on which legal jurisdiction you're in as well. So I think it's going to vary. And I'm not sure I've got an answer for you, but there is a sort of an area in the middle where there's a potential danger of crossing over.
I was going to give a politician's answer and answer a different question than you asked about use of threat intelligence. I think, so as a company, we often deal with that as at arm's length. We probably wouldn't necessarily be talking to hackers directly, but we would deal with companies like Kaspersky or other intelligence providers who are maybe more into that. And I guess for us, it's more like an ecosystem of who are all the different people we need to get input from. So we obviously are dealing with the police, the intelligence services directly, because there are threats that are geopolitical or terrorist related, and they sort of now shade one into the other. Is it a cyber threat? Is it a physical threat? Clearly the same people are sometimes doing both things. And at the very at the tactical end, we're getting lists about IP addresses that we can block. So when people talk about threat intelligence, sometimes they mean that, sometimes they mean the actual strategic or something in the middle. And there's all kinds of different players. As to the value, it's hard to put your finger on it, but you certainly wouldn't want to be without it. It's a bit like advertising. Probably half of it's wasted. We don't know which half. And at the moment, it feels to me like it still develops. There's a very kind of tight and closed intelligence community. People who are security cleared, they're on the phone to GCHQ, that they share a lot of information, and getting the information out can be quite difficult. But they obviously know a lot of things that are happening at one end, but then at the other end, you still have to protect your network against all that stuff coming in. So it's, it has value, but it's hard to write it down. I think one of the things we need to try and do is be better at articulating the value from it, because we are investing money in it. So we certainly wouldn't want to be without it.
I think this will probably ability to effectively mine information is important too. It's going back to the issue about so many alerts. You don't know what's the value, but it's okay sitting on a ton of data, but if actually you can't pick out what's significant, then maybe it doesn't have the same value.
So was it about the cyber security, or is it about physical security?
More cyber security, so more cyber.
Cyber.
I think those two things are becoming more morphing together, right? So as everything is the network, then you can start impacting real things in the physical world by cyber attacks, right? So whether it's shutting down refineries or turning off medical equipment over the network, that stuff, or your connected car crashing that, those things are all now not science fiction but fact, and so therefore they're the threats we need to engage with. So I think the two things are coming together.
If you talk to government or you talk to police agencies in this country, they will distinguish currently between cyber-dependent crime and cyber-assisted crime. I think within the next 10 years that differentiation, that distinction will disappear. It's kind of problematic right now, but it will go.
Just say anything to...
No, I mean, but there are other things that one can do by looking at underground markets, underground forums, and things like that. So you can look for the state of security, so to speak. So whatever, there are these databases that get dumped on Pastebin, and you can, if you're a company looking for those, you can figure out whether you got breached or not. you can look at the prices of whatever accounts on different services, cloud providers, and this gives you a measure of their security because they're more expensive. It's more difficult to create accounts, and so probably they're more reliable, and things like that.
It's about the same argument as buying the expensive aspirin over the cheap aspirin. Just because somebody throws the marketing behind that or actually gives you the illusion of security, it doesn't mean much. I mean, I can argue that free providers may actually offer more security because they might actually know what they're doing.
No, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about prices on the underground market. So if you look at, I want to buy 1,000 Twitter accounts and they are, I don't know, they cost £10, and I want to buy 1,000 Gmail accounts and they're worth £100. It's because creating accounts on Google is more difficult, for example. They do more checks. But it's just an example. But if something is very, very cheap on the underground market, it means that it's easy to obtain.
You had a question? Yeah, it's kind of more of an industry-focused question. So forgive me if no one knows what I'm saying. You've heard of course, of Darktrace. For those of you who don't know, Darktrace is a company that offers very advanced AIs that monitor everyone's networks. And if a network terminal starts doing something that it's not usually doing, it basically flags it up and prevents it. Now, Darktrace, I'm sure you've seen, have a really good marketing and sales strategy, and they are kind of marketing this to a lot of the former guys at GCHQ guys, and they're very well experienced, and they're marketing that this is the answer to all your prayers. And
I think you just answered your own question if you're right to ask.
Yeah. But do you think that in the future, or hopefully soon, the government will kind of make this type of marketing and sales strategy kind of unallowed? It's like, 50 years ago, we didn't enforce seatbelts to be worn, but the government's passed laws saying, well, car manufacturers had to create reliable seatbelts. So companies like Darktrace can't say that thing is perfect, because they are deceiving and kind of doing a disservice to the cybersecurity industry. So.
It's an old problem. I mean, I think 1896, Carlyle Carbolic Smoke Ball Company, where the distinction, is this an advertising puff where they say this will cure the cold, or is it intended as an actual contractual thing? And that's what it will come down to. It's like, well, will people understand this as, we're the best thing ever? And it's like, well, you know that when they say that, not necessarily it's real, or is it actually, this will stop, kill all known germs, dead? Will it? Is it, so I'm not sure you can outlaw it. I'm not sure you can stop people saying it. I think what you need to do is to make sure that if people are actually making a firm commitment about something, then it's seen as a commitment. If you're making a sort of a vague offer, whether that's hair dye or conditioner or baked beans, it's.
I've got to say caveat emptor. Given the price of the software, it's not as if it's going to be something that is small companies will invest in. It's going to be big companies. So honestly.
But in the US, the Federal Trade Commission has been coming down quite hard on security services and tools which don't deliver. But they're mainly focusing on tools that are marketed to the customer, because the general expectation is that businesses are big enough to look after themselves. They can hire lawyers, they can evaluate things, but the government should be there to, first of all, protect individual citizens, not so much companies.
We won't see any more military-grade encryption, NSA-proof.
Well, if you look at the companies who the FTC have gone after, they don't use that term. They say industry standard. They're not even allowed to say high security, and they're certainly not allowed to say military-grade security.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. The government is in a, has sort of two heads on it in this case. So last week I was at the Financial Times Cybersecurity Summit in Washington, and this very Darktrace featured quite prominently. Well, they were one of the sponsors of the conference, and they were one of the companies that were invited to speak and basically talk about what all the things they can do and so on. Yeah, and I must say, to some extent, I had a hard time not keeping a straight face on some of these things, but I was trying, because it's it's very clear that actually the UK government thinks that security technology is one of the potential big growth industries for the UK. They see the UK as first and foremost, and basically ex-GCHQ people going and setting up companies and marketing their stuff. That's actually the government's dream, right? That this will be an industry sector that creates revenue. So yeah, I think we need to, and I hope, I always think that not just individual, I always use the term that individual consumers and citizens should actually think more about unionizing and taking collective action in order to really, I think that's going to be an essential step in protecting yourselves better. If you don't have all the time, or if you don't have the knowledge and skills to do it, you need to band together with other people and find ways of getting access to things. And I think in the same way, I think that industry sectors will basically, I think you'd start them forming trade associations or having their own research centers that basically will test and will do their own evaluation before they sink lots of money into products and services like that. I think that's, do you think that's going to be
I mean, possibly. I mean, in our sector, there's obviously very stiff competition and the need to maintain competition between the different players. So when we talk to BT or something, we always be slightly at arm's length in having a discussion with them, because we have to compete in the market. But I think we do try and share some things. So I think
yes. So for instance, in terms of threat intelligence, I think your sector has always been very good.
And that's sort of coordinated by the government, and obviously not just in the UK, but in other countries we operate in. The UK is a leading one. So yeah, it's certainly something we would expect to see more in the future. I'm sure we'll never see the end of marketing claims. That's life. In the software world, forget security, software generally.
Life generally.
Yeah, life generally, but software is a great place because it's intangible. You can sell something.
Yeah, but I think you've actually got a good point there to some extent. If basically so you can translate that hype into it's a horrible world out there. And here is we provide you with a safety blanket security blanket that will protect you from this. If you're falling for that, maybe it's just your own fault.
Well, I think it's back to your human factors actually. People, as you say, people want security. It's a core. Yeah, absolutely core human need, and even CISOs need security, of the other sort with a small s, and sometimes people want to believe that this is
they want to believe, but I think basically what the reality is that we all have to learn is that it's a problem that you have to engage with and that you constantly have to work at. You can't just basically say, okay, I'll buy this product box and now I can stop thinking about it.
Just a quick question. When you guys are talking about security, do you define it? Is it like a pie when you take a piece of it and making it more secure, you lose more of your privacy? Of what's left? Because how do you balance that, the privacy and the security?
I think the trade-off between security and privacy is a myth that lazy people use to say, I want whatever, if you ask me what data do I want and how long do I keep it, the answer is everything and forever. I think that's an approach that fairly lazy people use to make their job easier.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you look at it from the government, or let's say the FBI and the Air Force, their role is to protect and getting more information. But that also means invading people's privacy. Having that little back door. You see where I'm coming from?
My attitude is like if a court basically says it's reasonable to ask to basically get for that information that normal citizens who are not suspected of crime, or terrorism, I think that's a good safe. Basically we have. I think
it's a legal framework, isn't it? Because as part of our operating license, we have to give the police access to call records of customers on production of a warrant. So it's like a certain, they have to provide a warrant. We have to hold the records and give them to them, and that's it. And interestingly, on the Apple FBI, obviously, if the data had been stored in iCloud, then they would have to give the data up to the FBI anyway. There's no question about that. or if it was a phone call, then same thing. So there's plenty of places that we do have to give access in the legal framework of the country in question. Obviously, in some countries, there's more requirement for privacy, like Germany, with a very much stronger both custom and practice, and then in the UK, maybe in the middle, and some of the countries less still. So we obviously have a legal framework we operate in.
And that's a political.
Yeah, it's a political thing, which hopefully is democratically decided. But
and this discussion has come up with respect to the Investor Powers Bill. Several organisations have raised the issue that if you ask companies to store more data about individuals, this isn't just a privacy problem, this is a security problem. This is very, very sensitive data. And the response from the government was not very impressive to me. They said they'll pass a law to make sure that the information is protected. But just because there's a law doesn't mean that the information actually will be protected. And there's many, many cases of where security has been weakened at the request of governments, at the request of police, and then those weaknesses have been then exploited by criminals. So there isn't really a security-privacy trade-off. For many people, privacy is security and security is privacy. When there is a trade-off, it's between surveillance and security.
One last question.
So this is kind of back to the vendors kind of topic. So I'm not like. So do you think like that people like the security industry doing a good job of engaging like open or of making use of open source, or do you think the future? How like there's like kind of a trend now, like people are saying like the API economy and more companies like SaaS companies are starting to do freemium or like open source models, and a lot of big companies are like open sourcing their tools, like dev tools. Do you think that the future in security would be about having more open source tools as opposed to being like some that are quite hard to access and really like vendors are really like expensive or like closed off?
I think it's going to continue to be a mixed environment, actually. I think there will always be both. I mean, it was said a few years ago about open source that, well, if you open source stuff and everybody gets to lay their hands on it, then you're going to have kind of greater security because it's all done kind of, with the hands over the table. And then you look at Heartbleed, for example, which was, issues with open source. And it's pretty clear that you don't necessarily get greater security simply because it's open source or not open source either. So, I think that's not necessarily a security debate. In fact, I don't think that's the whole thing, but there'll be a mixture, I think.
I don't think comparing Heartbleed to the mishaps of major companies is even fair. Heartbleed is two guys and a dog doing OpenSSL, for God's sake.
Absolutely.
The dog is mangy.
And my first reaction to
I mean,
when
come
this...
on, in two weeks we're going to see the same thing for Samba. Somebody already built the site for that.
But this is
Microsoft.
This is actually why course, like for instance, the one that David Pym runs on basically economics, policy, and philosophy is so important, because I mean the first thought that when that story came out, the first thought that crossed my mind was there's all these billion-dollar corporations, right, who've been building their security. It's parasitic, right, on the back of this open source volunteer effort, and none of them has actually ever sit down and thought like, maybe we should invest in this.
Since Heartbleed became public, the OpenSSL guys managed to gather enough funding that they would normally get in like 3 years, and they announced that. Because nobody actually thinks about it, it's just some code out there. It's pretty,
and I think that is like, we should really learn from that, and you should regularly look at, your whole infrastructure, the technology that you're using, and play these kind of what if games, and actually look, how likely is it? I think that's basically the kind of what we're talking about, the lack of that a lot of companies at the moment still don't engage enough, and do this forward-looking thinking about, and I think if, anybody who does proper risk management should have identified this as, if you start scratching at the surface and actually look at, we're relying on this, but how is that resourced? Who is actually doing this? And
Usually that's scary when you're a company, because you've got all these tools you don't realize are sitting at the bottom of some stack of software, like, struts or Java and, all kinds of things. And you discover weaknesses, and then you look to see where the software is used, and it's actually embedded in thousands of different pieces of software. It's, or Adobe, is the other kind of major one. So it's a really difficult challenge for companies which have got an installed base of stuff to delve layer by layer, from the top to the bottom. There's a lot of different things that you've incorporated or have been incorporated by someone, sold something to you, incorporated in something else. It's hard to trace.
There's an organization called the Core Infrastructure Initiative, and they got a lot of money from Google. And what they're trying to do is looking for things like OpenSSL, so important open source projects that are core infrastructure for the internet. And they're looking at ways of just giving them money to do what they're doing, but also helping them with better security tools, suggesting that they follow particular development practices and helping them do that. Trying to make sure that they actually have effective infrastructure, and it's not just some random person's laptop that the kid is playing in. The kid is playing computer games, and then it's the build infrastructure that is used for 10,000 computers.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you for your attention, and most importantly, our panelists for their kind insight. Thank you very much. And I believe, or I hope, there's going to be drinks and meatballs across the room, so we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you.